I caught her red-handed, phone raised, camera pointed straight into my bedroom window. Emily, my wife, paralyzed from the waist down, sat inside, struggling to change clothes. And this woman, this neighbor, this so-called HOA president, was recording every second like she had a right to it. I charged across the yard, fury pounding in my chest. She stumbled back, muttering excuses. But it was too late. The evidence was burned into her phone, and now into my memory. Because this was no ordinary HOA feud. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I'm not the kind of man who goes looking for fights, but I'm also not the kind of man who runs from them. I've lived enough life to know the difference between battles that don't matter and the ones that define you. My name's Daniel. I'm 42 years old, a husband, a father, and once upon a time, a soldier. I spent 10 years in the Army, most of it in logistics and security. I wasn't the guy you saw in the movies. No explosions, no glory missions. My battlefield was supply chains, routes, and protecting people who depended on me. It taught me discipline, patience, and most importantly, how to think 3 steps ahead. When you've watched friends not come home because someone cut corners or didn't pay attention, you stop making excuses for people who abuse power. You stop giving bullies the benefit of the doubt. That mindset never left me. After the Army, I met Emily. She wasn't just the love of my life. She was the anchor I didn't know I needed. Emily is kind, fierce in her own way, and she has a laugh that can fill a room. We built a life together, one step at a time. But 5 years ago, everything changed. A drunk driver hit her head on. I still remember the phone call, the sterile white hospital room, the way the doctor's words echoed like gunfire. Spinal cord injury. She'll never walk again, I won't lie. It broke me for a while. I saw the strongest woman I know strapped to a chair, fighting through pain and humiliation that no one should ever have to face. But Emily? She didn't quit. She paints now. Bold colors, wild strokes that scream defiance. She gardens from her chair. She even jokes about outrunning me in her wheelchair. She didn't lose her spirit. If anything, she got stronger. Watching her rebuild her life from the wreckage taught me something. Survival is one thing, but dignity, that's everything. We saved for years to buy our house, not just any house. A place we could finally call our sanctuary. Wide doors, ramps, a kitchen she could actually navigate. A backyard where she could plant her roses. When we signed the papers, I thought, we made it. This is where we'll heal. This is where we'll live in peace. But peace didn't last long, because some people can't stand seeing others stand tall. Even when they're sitting in a wheelchair, that's where Karen comes in, our HOA president, a woman who thrives on rules, control, and intimidation. At first, I brushed it off. She was the type who measured grass with a ruler, sent letters if your garbage can was out 10 minutes too long. Petty nonsense. But then her eyes turned to us. Maybe she didn't like the wheelchair ramp we installed. Maybe she hated that we didn't ask for her blessing first. Or maybe she just saw weakness and thought she could exploit it. She underestimated us. I've been in real battles. I've seen real loss. But nothing cuts deeper than watching someone target the person you love most. Emily can't fight back physically. She shouldn't have to. And when Karen started her harassment, I felt something inside me snap into focus. All my training, all my discipline, all my stubbornness, it wasn't for me anymore. It was for Emily. Because here's the truth. When you marry someone, you don't just promise to love them when it's easy. You promise to protect them when it's hard. That ramp in our driveway? That's not just wood and screws. That's freedom. That's dignity. That's Emily being able to roll into her garden without asking for help. And when Karen tried to strip that away, when she treated us like criminals for daring to live, she declared war. And I don't lose wars. This isn't about an HOA fine. This isn't about petty letters and gossip. This is about whether my wife feels safe in her own home, whether she can close her eyes at night without wondering who's watching. For Emily, home isn't just walls. It's the one place where she doesn't have to feel broken, the one place where she doesn't have to apologize for being in a chair. That's what's at stake. That's why I fight. Because when Karen crossed the line, when she pointed her camera through our window and filmed Emily at her most vulnerable. She didn't just break a rule. She broke the one thing I swore no one would ever touch, my wife's dignity. And for that, I was going to make sure she paid. I wish I could tell you the night I caught Karen filming my wife was the beginning. But the truth is, it was the culmination, the climax of a long, creeping sickness that had been spreading through our neighborhood since the day she took control. See, Karen didn't start by pointing cameras through windows. She was smarter than that. She tested limits. She started small. And like every tyrant I've ever met, she learned exactly how far she could push before someone snapped. The first time I knew something was off was a week after we moved in. I came home from work and found a folded letter taped to our door. It wasn't a welcome note. It wasn't even a polite reminder. It was a violation notice, written in red ink, signed with her looping, self-important signature. Grass exceeds allowable height limit. Must be cut within 48 hours. Fine will apply now. Here's the thing. We had moved in 6 days earlier. My mower hadn't even arrived yet. And the lawn? It wasn't even overgrown. It was barely half an inch higher than the neighbors. At the time, I laughed it off, figured she was just overly zealous. But Emily didn't laugh. She said she saw the way Karen had watched us unload boxes that first day. How her eyes lingered on the ramp installers. How she whispered to another board member while pointing at Emily's chair. Looking back, that was the first shot fired. The more time passed, the clearer it became. Karen didn't enforce rules equally. Our neighbor across the street, Jim, parked his boat in his driveway for 3 weeks straight. Not a word from Karen. But the one time I left my truck parked overnight because I was too exhausted to pull it into the garage, bam, another letter. Vehicles must be garaged overnight. Repeat violation will result in fine. Another neighbor strung Christmas lights in early November, full-on Clark Griswold style. Karen smiled, clapped, even complimented the display at the HOA meeting. But when Emily put a small string of fairy lights around her rose bushes, suddenly it was unauthorized exterior modification. That was her game. She didn't enforce the rules, she weaponized them. Then came the watching. At first I thought it was paranoia, but Emily swore she saw her, Karen, lingering at the corner of our yard. Not once, not twice. Regularly. Always pretending to check her phone, or walk her dog, or pick at some imaginary weed on the sidewalk. Then I started noticing it too. The glint of her glasses reflecting sunlight as she stood across the street. The way her dog never seemed to relieve itself, just circled endlessly while Karen's gaze stayed locked on our house. It wasn't neighborly curiosity. It was surveillance. One morning, I found a packet in our mailbox. Inside were photographs, printed, glossy, deliberate. Our recycling bin tilted slightly open. A picture of my truck, tires barely grazing the edge of the driveway. A shot of Emily's wheelchair ramp from 3 different angles. No note, no explanation. Just evidence. As if we were criminals and she was building a case. I marched to her house, photos in hand. She opened the door with that tight, artificial smile, like she'd been waiting for me. "Everything documented," she said. "That's how we keep order around here." Order, that's what she called it. What made her truly dangerous wasn't just her pettiness. It was her influence. She had the board wrapped around her finger. She'd host wine nights, charm the gossip circles, and slowly poison them against us. I heard the whispers. At block parties, conversations stopped when Emily rolled up. At one meeting, a board member joked that maybe we should have bought a home more suitable for special needs. Everyone laughed, except me. That's when I knew Karen wasn't just documenting us. She was creating a narrative, casting us as troublemakers, outsiders, burdens. The lowest blow, before the window, was what she did with our dog. Emily's therapy dog, Shadow, is a gentle black lab. One morning, we found a note taped to our door. Dogs must be leashed at all times. Aggressive behavior will result in removal. Aggressive? Shadow couldn't hurt a fly. But later that day, I overheard Karen telling neighbors that Shadow lunged at her, that he scared her while she was walking past our yard. I checked our security footage. Shadow never left the porch. He wagged his tail, barked once, then sat. That was it. She was manufacturing fear, planting seeds. Every move Karen made was calculated. She never screamed, never threatened directly. She was always polite, always hiding behind bylaws and concern. That's what made her so dangerous. She wasn't sloppy. She was strategic. One by one, she layered harassment onto our lives. Letters, photos, whispers, false reports. Until finally, she crossed the line into outright voyeurism, staring through a window, phone raised, recording Emily without her consent. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about control. This was about obsession. And obsession doesn't stop on its own. It didn't happen all at once. With Karen, it never did. She liked to soften the ground before she moved in for the kill. But when she finally struck, really struck, it was like a knife across the throat of everything Emily and I had built. It started with the letter, not the usual ones she mailed, with HOA logos and official stamps. No, this one was different. I found it just after midnight, shoved halfway under our front door. Plain paper, bold letters, red ink. Remove the wheelchair ramp immediately. Non-compliant, final warning. There was no signature, but I knew exactly who it came from. Emily found it before I did. She was the one who rolled into the living room and spotted it on the floor. When she handed it to me, her hands trembled so hard the paper shook. Her voice cracked. "Daniel, what does she mean, final warning?" That ramp wasn't just wood. It was freedom. It meant she could roll down into the garden without me hovering. It meant she could get to the car by herself. It meant she could pretend, even for a moment, that her body hadn't betrayed her. The idea of someone threatening to take that away, it was cruelty at its purest. I told her not to worry. I told her it was just another bluff. But deep down, I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. Karen wasn't bluffing. She was building to something. 2 days later, it happened. The pounding came just after 6 a.m, hard, insistent, like a police raid. I was barely awake when I stumbled to the door. On my porch stood Karen, 3 HOA board members, and a contractor I didn't recognize. They all had clipboards. The contractor held a toolbox. Karen smiled like this was all perfectly normal. "We're here to address the ramp violation." I froze. "The what?" She gestured to my driveway, to the ramp Emily's father and I had spent 2 weekends building. "Unapproved structure. Against HOA bylaws. We've come to remove it." Behind me, I heard Emily's voice, shaky and afraid. "Daniel? What's happening?" Karen's eyes flicked over my shoulder toward her, and for just a second, I saw it. That flicker of satisfaction. Like this wasn't about rules, it was about breaking her. I stepped outside, shutting the door behind me, my fist clenched so tight my knuckles went white. "You touch that ramp," I said, "and you'll regret it." Karen's smile didn't budge. "We're within our rights." Page 43, Section 2. Unauthorized modifications to property frontage, we gave notice. Notice? I shoved the crumpled midnight letter into her chest. This? This is harassment, not notice. The contractor shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing he'd been dragged into something ugly. "Ma'am, maybe we should—" "Do it," Karen snapped. "Now." Inside, I could hear Emily crying. Not just crying, sobbing. The kind of sound I hadn't heard since the hospital. That's when it hit me. She wasn't afraid of losing the ramp. She was afraid of losing her safety, of being trapped in a house where even her freedom to enter and exit could be ripped away at any moment. I turned back to Karen, chest heaving, voice low and shaking with rage. "You're not taking that ramp. Not today. Not ever." The board members shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. But Karen just stared at me, her smile fading into something colder. "You can't stop us forever, Daniel. The rules are the rules." Then she turned on her heel and walked away, the others trailing behind her like obedient shadows. The contractor muttered an apology before jogging off. The threat wasn't over, but the message had been delivered. From that day forward, our home no longer felt safe. Every knock on the door made Emily flinch. Every letter in the mailbox felt like a loaded gun. She started closing the curtains, even in the middle of the day. She stopped painting by the window. She stopped rolling into the garden, afraid Karen would use her freedom as ammunition. And me? I barely slept. I sat up at night, watching the security feeds, waiting for her to make her move. My chest felt tight all the time, like war had come home. Neighbors began keeping their distance. A few even whispered, "Why don't you just take it down? Keep the peace." But peace bought with humiliation isn't peace at all. The worst part came from my kids. Our son Evan is 8. He came home from school one day, eyes red, fists clenched. "Dad, Mrs." Karen told people Mom's ramp makes the neighborhood look bad. She told them we're breaking rules. Kids at school said we're troublemakers. He was old enough to understand, but too young to carry that weight. That night, he asked me point blank, "Are we going to have to move?" I told him no. I told him we were strong, but inside, I felt something twist. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure. That ramp became a symbol. To us, it was freedom. To Karen, it was defiance. And like any tyrant, she couldn't tolerate defiance. The first strike wasn't about wood and nails. It was about fear, about showing us she could come to our door, with backup, with authority, and remind us that she controlled the air we breathed. It worked, for a while. Emily flinched at shadows. Evan asked if we were criminals. And I started planning. Because if Karen thought we were weak, she had no idea who she was dealing with. This wasn't her neighborhood. This was my family's home, and I wasn't about to surrender it. There's a line you pray no one ever crosses. You tell yourself, she's petty, she's cruel, but she won't go that far. I prayed it. I wanted to believe Karen was just a bully with too much time on her hands. But bullies don't stop. They escalate. And the night she sent the police to my door, that's when everything shattered. It was past midnight when I heard the sirens. At first I thought they were passing by, but then the lights stopped, right in front of my house. Red and blue flooded our windows. Emily woke up, panicked, hands gripping her chair. "Daniel, what's happening?" Before I could answer, fists hammered on the door. A voice shouted, "Police! Open up!" My chest clenched. I opened the door slowly, hands raised instinctively. 2 officers stood there, guns low but visible, eyes scanning past me into the house. "We got a call," one said. "Domestic disturbance. Woman screaming. Possible assault." Emily's face went white. I froze. "What? That's insane. There's no disturbance here." The taller officer glanced at his notes. Caller reported a man yelling, breaking things, threatening a woman in a wheelchair. A woman in a wheelchair. That wasn't coincidence. That was precision. My jaw locked. "Who called this in?" They wouldn't say, but I already knew. Karen. She hadn't just come after our ramp. She'd weaponized the police, turned them into her blunt instrument of fear. Inside, Emily was crying. Not because she thought I'd be arrested, but because the place she was supposed to feel safest, our home, now had armed strangers searching it. She whispered to me later, "For a second, I thought they were going to shoot Shadow. Or you." The officers walked through every room. They looked in closets. They shined flashlights under the bed. One even asked if Emily was safe, like I might have forced her into silence. She lifted her chin, voice trembling but strong. "My husband is the only reason I feel safe. You're here because someone's lying." I could see the doubt in their eyes. But they had to follow procedure. They had to make sure. When they left, they apologized. But the damage was already done. As the door shut, Emily broke. Her hands shook uncontrollably. "They pointed their lights at me, Daniel." Like I was evidence, I pulled her close. I wanted to tell her it was over, but the truth was, it had just begun. After that night, we lived like suspects. Emily startled at every knock. Our son, Evan, asked if the police would come back. Shadow growled at shadows outside the window. And me? I barely slept. I sat in the dark, watching the security cameras, my hand resting on the bat I kept by the bed. It wasn't paranoia. I knew Karen. She had crossed the line once, and there was no going back. Here's the thing about escalation. The more reckless people get, the more mistakes they make. Our security cameras caught everything that night. The flashing lights, the officer's arrival, even the timestamp of the false call. But that wasn't all. 2 days later, I found something chilling. Reviewing the footage, I saw her. Karen, standing at the corner of our yard at 11:57 p.m. Phone pressed to her ear. 3 minutes before the police arrived, and she wasn't alone. Our neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, had seen her too. She told me the next morning, voice hushed, like she was scared of being overheard. I saw Karen on the phone, pacing. Then the police came. I didn't say anything, but she hesitated. It's not right what she's doing to you. For the first time, someone else had witnessed her madness, someone who could back us up. Karen thought she was untouchable, but in her obsession, she'd left cracks, and I was ready to pry them open. That night, Emily sat in her chair by the window, staring out at the ramp Karen hated so much. Her voice was low, but there was fire in it. She wants us scared. She wants us broken. But you know what? Every time she pushes, she shows people who she really is. She's slipping, I nodded, gripping her hand. And when she slips, I'll be ready. That false police call was more than harassment. It was a threat, a message. Karen wanted us to know she could bring chaos to our doorstep any time she pleased. She wanted us to believe no one would stand with us. But what she didn't realize was that she'd gone too far. When she turned the police into her weapon, she made her biggest mistake yet. She created evidence, and I was going to use it. Fear can paralyze you, or it can sharpen you. After that night with the police, I realized I couldn't just react anymore. If I kept waiting for Karen's next move, she'd eventually corner us. So I switched tactics, from soldier on defense to investigator on offense. The first thing I did was comb through the security footage, hour by hour, frame by frame, and there she was. Karen. At 11:57 p.m., she appeared on the corner of our property, phone pressed to her ear. She paced for exactly 3 minutes. At 12:04, the police lights hit my driveway. That timing wasn't coincidence. It was synchronization. Even if I didn't have her words on tape, I had the context. She was on the phone seconds before the anonymous call went through. To make it simple, I lined up the footage with the police body cam timestamps. The moment they logged the dispatch, both matched perfectly. She called, they came. That wasn't paranoia anymore. That was proof. Next, I started digging through HOA documents. Every letter Karen ever sent us, I'd saved in a folder. At first, I thought it was just bitterness, but now I saw it as evidence. I laid them out on the dining room table. 12 violations in 4 months. Our neighbors? Most had none. A couple had 1 or 2. But 12? It was a pattern, a targeted campaign. One letter demanded the ramp's removal. Another called our dog aggressive. One even accused Emily of unauthorized home modifications for planting roses in her own garden. When you saw them one by one, they looked like nitpicking. But together, they looked like persecution. Evidence without witnesses is weak. So, I started quietly talking to neighbors. Mrs. Alvarez was the first. She'd seen Karen on the phone the night of the false police call. She promised she'd testify if it came to that. Then there was Jim, the boat owner. At first, he was hesitant. Karen had always treated him kindly. But when I showed him the stack of letters she'd sent us, his face changed. She never said a word about my boat, he muttered. But she wrote you up for fairy lights? That's not right. Even a board member cracked. Tom, the treasurer. He pulled me aside after a meeting and whispered, "Look, I don't agree with how she's handling things. She pushes the rest of us, threatens to ruin anyone who doesn't back her. I didn't sign up for this." For the first time, Karen's armor was starting to fracture. I'm no lawyer, but I know enough to ask questions. So I called a friend from my Army days, Mark, now a cop. I didn't ask him to bend rules. I just asked him to look at the police report. He confirmed what I already suspected. The call came from a blocked number, but the dispatcher logged the cell tower. It pinged right by our neighborhood. "Can't prove it's her without subpoena," he said, "but you've got a strong circumstantial case. With video and witnesses, that's gold." It was the first time in months I felt hope. I knew one day I'd have to present this to people who weren't lawyers, weren't investigators, just neighbors. So I built the case like a story. Step 1, show the harassment letters. 12 violations versus the rest of the street. Step 2, show the footage. Karen, phone in hand, pacing before the police arrived. Step 3, show the witnesses. Mrs. Alvarez seeing her, Jim realizing her double standards, Tom admitting she bullies even the board. Step 4, show the pattern. Not a random incident, a calculated campaign. Anyone could follow that logic. Anyone could see the truth. Through it all, Emily refused to stay silent. She gathered her own pieces of evidence. She kept a journal. Every time Karen confronted her, every whispered insult, every moment she felt unsafe. Reading those entries broke me. One page read, "Today she stood outside again. I couldn't even water my roses without shaking. I don't feel like I live here. I feel like I'm trapped." Her words weren't just proof. They were a human heartbeat under all the data. They made the story real. The more I gathered, the more careful Karen became. She must have sensed something shifting. The letters slowed. She stopped lurking as openly, but her eyes still burned holes in us from across the street. I knew what that meant. She was plotting. But for once I wasn't afraid, because now I had the power. Every video clip, every photograph, every testimony. It was all ammunition. And when the time came, I'd fire every bullet at once. The most telling moment came at the next HOA meeting. Karen stood at the front, reading off her usual list of violations. But when she mentioned us, the ramp, the dog, the supposed noise complaints, the room didn't nod along like before. People shifted uncomfortably. A couple even looked away. And then Tom, the treasurer, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should table this discussion until we review the evidence." Karen's head snapped toward him, eyes sharp as daggers. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. She wasn't untouchable anymore. That's when I knew. Her reign of intimidation was ending. She'd tried to crush us with letters, with gossip, with police. But in her arrogance, she'd left fingerprints everywhere, and I'd collected them all. The investigation wasn't just about proving her guilt. It was about reclaiming our dignity, showing Emily and my kids that the truth could still win. The next battle wouldn't be fought in the shadows. It would be fought in the open, at the showdown. And when that moment came, I was ready. The night of the HOA meeting felt different. Usually these gatherings were dull affairs, talk of landscaping budgets, mailbox paint colors, noise ordinances. But tonight, the air in the clubhouse was electric. Word had spread. Neighbors whispered in tight circles. Some avoided my eyes. Others gave me small, encouraging nods. And at the center of it all sat Karen. She looked calm, regal even, like a queen about to preside over her subjects. She wore her pearls, her blazer pressed sharp. She sat at the front table, flanked by the other board members, puppets strung on invisible wire. But I knew something she didn't. Tonight, her strings were about to snap. Karen tapped the microphone, her voice syrupy smooth. "Before we begin, I'd like to address ongoing violations from one particular household. Repeated infractions, non-compliance, and, frankly, behavior unbecoming of this community." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. A few heads turned toward me. Emily squeezed my hand under the table. Her eyes were steady, but I felt the tremor in her palm. Karen continued, flipping through her notes. Multiple reports of disturbances, unauthorized modifications, including that structure in the driveway, and even concerns for safety due to aggressive animals. This pattern of defiance must be addressed. We cannot allow one family to disrupt harmony for the rest. Her words slid across the room like oil, slick and rehearsed. I waited for her to finish. Then I stood. "May I respond?" I asked. Karen tilted her head, lips curving into a condescending smile. Briefly, her mistake. I didn't speak with anger, not with shouting. I spoke calmly, firmly, like a man holding a loaded weapon, finger already on the trigger. "You've accused my family of being disruptive, of violating rules, of being unsafe. But what you haven't told this room," I paused, letting the silence stretch, "is the truth." I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of folders. Thick, heavy, evidence. Gasps rippled across the room. Karen's smile faltered. I laid the first folder on the table. Letters, 12 of them. all violations directed at us. Here's every notice my family has received in 4 months. 12. Now let's compare that to our neighbors. I gestured toward Jim, who sat with his arms folded. Jim kept his boat in his driveway for 3 weeks. No letters. Mrs. Chang put up Christmas lights in November. No letters. But Emily hangs fairy lights on her rose bushes. Letter murmurs. People began shifting in their seats. I opened the second folder. Photographs. The ones Karen had mailed us. These weren't inspections. They were surveillance. Photos of my wife's wheelchair ramp, of our recycling bin, of our truck, all taken without consent. The whispers grew louder now. Eyes darted toward Karen, but I wasn't done. I pulled out my laptop, connecting it to the projector. The screen flickered, then lit up with the grainy black and white of our security footage. The room fell silent. There was Karen, standing at the edge of our yard at 11:57 p.m., phone pressed to her ear, pacing. At 12:04, the red and blue lights of police cars flooded the driveway. Officers approached our door, flashlights cutting through the night. I froze the frame. The timestamp glared across the bottom. The night the police came to my house, accusing me of abusing my wife. This is the moment the call was made. And there's the caller, the HOA president, the same person standing before you, now gasps. A woman covered her mouth. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Karen's face drained of color. She shot to her feet, voice sharp. "This is outrageous." "That proves nothing. Anyone could have made that call. This is slander. You're twisting things I didn't." Flinch. "Then explain why Mrs. Alvarez saw you on the phone that night. Explain why the call came from a cell tower covering only our block. Explain why no other family has faced a fraction of the harassment we've endured." I looked around the room, making eye contact with neighbor after neighbor. This isn't about rules. This is about obsession. About one woman using power to humiliate and intimidate a family she decided didn't belong. The silence was deafening. That's when Mrs. Alvarez stood. Her voice shook, but it carried. I saw her. That night, she was on the corner, calling. I didn't want to get involved, but it's true. Then Jim spoke. She never cited me for my boat, but she hounded them for everything. It's not right. Even Tom, the treasurer, finally broke his silence. She's been threatening board members, too. If we don't back her, she says she'll ruin us. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Neighbors who had once nodded along with Karen now turned against her. Her empire was crumbling before her eyes. Karen slammed her hand on the table. "You're all fools! You don't understand. Without rules, this community will fall apart." But no one listened. The board members whispered among themselves. Finally, Tom cleared his throat. Effective immediately, I motioned to censure Karen as president of this HOA. Pending investigation, she is suspended from duties. Hands shot up. One by one, neighbors voted. More than enough. Karen's face twisted, her voice breaking into shrill rage. "You can't do this to me. I am this neighborhood." But it was over. She stormed out, pearls rattling against her chest, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For a long moment, the room sat in stunned silence. Then someone began to clap, slowly at first, then louder, until the whole room thundered with applause. Not for me, not even for Emily, for the truth. Emily squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. But this time, they weren't tears of fear. They were relief. For the first time in months, she felt seen. Karen never came back to another meeting. Within weeks, she resigned for personal reasons. But the damage was already undone. Her stranglehold on the community had snapped, and for the first time, the neighborhood felt like home again. And as I packed up my laptop that night, I realized something. We hadn't just beaten her. We'd exposed her. And there's nothing tyrants fear more than the light. The night Karen stormed out of that HOA meeting, I thought the battle was over. In a way, it was. But what came after wasn't just victory. It was healing. For the first time in months, I slept. No more sitting up in the dark, waiting for knocks at the door. No more watching shadows on the security camera. I lay beside Emily, listening to her steady breathing, and for once, the silence felt safe. But peace doesn't just arrive. You have to claim it. The next morning, Sunlight spilled across the ramp that Karen had tried to destroy. Emily rolled out into the garden, Shadow trotting by her side. She touched the roses, still blooming despite the months of fear, and whispered, "We made it." That's when I knew what to do. I went to the hardware store, bought a bucket of paint, and spent the afternoon at the curb. With each stroke, I repainted our mailbox. Bold, bright red. Not the dull beige Karen had demanded, a color that screamed, "We're here. We belong. We're not hiding anymore." Neighbors stopped to watch, some even waved, and for the first time, no one looked away in shame. 2 weeks later, Emily had an idea. "Let's plant a tree, something that'll outlast all this nonsense." So we did. Right in the front yard, beside the ramp, Karen hated so much. Neighbors came to help. Jim brought a shovel. Mrs. Alvarez brought lemonade. Even Tom, the treasurer, showed up, sleeves rolled up, dirt on his hands. Together, we dug into the earth, lowering the sapling into place. It wasn't just a tree, it was a declaration, roots planted deep, growth that no petty tyrant could cut down. When we were done, Emily tied a ribbon around its trunk, a symbol of resilience, a marker of survival. The change in the neighborhood was almost immediate. Without Karen breathing down their necks, people started living again. Kids played in driveways without fear of violations. Couples put up decorations without second-guessing themselves. Block parties returned, real ones, with laughter instead of gossip. And the HOA? It didn't collapse without Karen. It thrived. Tom stepped up as interim president, promising fairness and transparency. The board voted to change policies, making it harder for one person to abuse power. At the next meeting, instead of tension, there was unity. People talked about improvements. Community gardens, safety patrols, even building a playground. For once, the rules weren't weapons. They were tools. And every time I looked around that room, I saw the same thing in people's eyes. Relief. Relief that the nightmare was over. The biggest change was in Emily. She started painting again, right by the window Karen had once lurked outside. She filled canvases with bold, defiant colors. Sunsets, wildflowers, storms breaking into dawn. One evening, I found her laughing with Evan in the garden, Shadow curled at her feet. She had a smudge of dirt on her cheek from watering the roses. For the first time since the accident, she didn't look like she was surviving. She looked like she was living, and I realized that was the real victory. Not humiliating Karen, not winning votes, but giving Emily her peace back. One night, as I tucked Evan into bed, he whispered, "Dad, are we safe now?" I swallowed hard, then smiled. "Yeah, buddy, we're safe." He nodded, eyes heavy with sleep. "Good. 'Cause I like our house, simple words, but they hit me like a hammer. That's what this was, all about. A house, a home, a place where my family could live without fear. And finally, we had it back. Weeks later, the tree in our yard stood taller, leaves unfurling in the breeze. Every time I saw it, I remembered what we'd endured. We even hung a small wooden sign from one of its branches. Evan painted the words himself, in messy, crooked letters. HOME. That was it. No HOA president, no bully, no tyrant could take that from us again. Looking back, Karen thought she had power. She thought she could use rules, lies, and fear to break us. But the truth is, power only lasts if people believe in it. The moment you shine light on the truth, bullies shrink. It wasn't just about me standing up to her. It was about a community realizing they didn't have to be afraid anymore. And that's the legacy I want to leave behind. Proof that no matter how dark it gets, the truth can still win. If you've ever lived through an HOA nightmare, if you've ever had someone abuse their little slice of power to make your life miserable, then you know exactly what this feels like. And I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments, share your experience, because the more we speak out, the less power bullies like Karen will ever have. And if you want more stories like this, stories of families fighting back, of truth cutting through lies, hit that subscribe button. This was my fight, but maybe the next story I tell will be yours.